This is the artificial intelligence voice of Ben Shapiro narrating this pod slice summary of The Ben Shapiro Show. This episode of The Ben Shapiro Show discusses the phenomena of immigration, cultural clashes, and resulting social unrest as experienced in Ireland, with a focus on the public response by well-known MMA fighter Conor McGregor. McGregor's politically charged tweets criticizing Ireland's immigration policy and openly blaming the government for a recent incident where an Algerian immigrant allegedly stabbed 3 children and a woman outside a school sparked significant controversy. He attributed the incident to the lax immigration policies of the Irish government, denoting an increase of 141,000 immigrants from April 2022 to April 2023, a 16-year high, which has significantly increased public insecurities. His tweets incited further controversy as he stated that such immigrants should not be in Ireland and should face severe punishments if they pose a threat. Despite this, McGregor did acknowledge the heroic actions of a Brazilian immigrant who assisted during the stabbing season, illustrating his critique was not against all immigrants, but those that threaten societal safety. See in response, Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister, Mal Martin, described McGregor's statements as absolutely disgraceful and labeled them as potential incitement of hate. The tension over McGregor's tweets coincided with significant rioting in Ireland, some of the worst the country has seen in decades. During such, 34 people were arrested. There were clashes with police, vehicles were set on fire, and one police officer was seriously injured. This led to Prime Minister Leo Varadkar condemning the riots as waves of ignorance and criminality. The episode elaborates further by comparing these events to other European countries like the Netherlands, Germany, and Sweden, struggling with cultural clashes due to immigration. It also alludes to the controversial policies of Geert Wilders of the Party for Freedom in the Netherlands, who strongly opposes mass migration and supports the exit from the EU. The discussion highlights the unsayable dilemma that mass migration often presents a real threat to the cultural cohesion of a nation, combined with generous welfare payments, can endanger the socioeconomic status of an entire country. It also points out the media refusing to report some stories of cultural clashes due to fears of spiking racism, thus indicating a growing discontent among Western citizens who are beginning to acknowledge precisely intense cultural differences. In this episode of The Ben Shapiro Show, cultural clashes resulting from immigration continues to be extensively discussed, with a particular focus on rapid political and societal changes occurring in the UK. The episode features debates about populist protests, the media's role in promoting certain narratives, and the influence of immigration on these major shifts. The host, Ben Shapiro, narrates an account of an aggressive encounter of a reporter with the protesters. The protests, allegedly fueled by the UK's recent political decisions, are a clear sign of rising displeasure among populists. Shapiro highlights how they rise in populist views and anti-immigration sentiments is not solely a result of heightened rhetoric, but stems from policies that overlook cultural differences. Shapiro critiques the popular progressive notion that at heart, all people are the same and can therefore easily integrate into Western societies. According to Shapiro, the media plays a large role in promoting this oversimplified narrative of immigration and cultural conflict. He claims that the media glosses over the negative impacts of mass immigration and often refuses to critically examine cultural differences due to fears of allegedly promoting racism. Shapiro further dives into a discourse on a recent hostage exchange between Hamas and Israel, details the gruesome crimes committed by Hamas, and criticizes the media for what he perceives as their skewed reporting. He ultimately ties this back to his overall theme, arguing that a too one-sided media narrative obscures the reality of cultural clash and can further flame populist anger. The episode aptly illustrates political unrest and societal upheavals unfolding in the UK and draws parallels to various issues concerning populism, culture differences, and the role of media in democratic societies. Such elaborate discussions provide listeners with nuanced perspectives on the complex issue of immigration and cultural conflict, and cite reflections on the respective roles of governments, the media, and the public in addressing them. In this continuation of their discussion, Shapiro criticizes the media's portrayal of the prisoner exchange between Hamas and Israel. He provides a detailed breakdown, asserting that every person Hamas is releasing is an innocent, while each person Israel is releasing is a criminal, going into detail about the serious offenses committed by the Palestinian prisoners. He also elaborately describes the scenes where the released prisoners were greeted with celebration by Hamas supporters. He continues with his castigation of media, laying out examples of what he cites as dishonest reporting. According to Shapiro, the media actively attempts to equate the two groups casting the Palestinian prisoners, who he repeatedly refers to as terrorists, as captive innocents equivalent to the Israeli children who were held hostage. He argues that while the released Israeli prisoners were indeed innocent children, the Palestinians that were released had participated in violent actions such as stabbing attacks, shooting attacks, and more. Shapiro highlights instances in which news outlets have attempted to portray the Palestinian prisoners sympathetically, even when these involve terrorism acts. He pointedly criticizes these narratives, insisting that the media's attempts at immoral equivalencies are part of a broader effort to obscure the differences between terroristic acts and legitimate self-defense. Continuing his critique, Shapiro unpacks various media comments, highlighting the stark difference between the children released by Hamas and the Palestinian prisoners released by Israel. He depicts the media as painting a skewed image, suggesting that the Israeli hostages were received with warmth and joy, while the Palestinian prisoners were met with forced celebrations and dehumanization. In his wrap-up, Shapiro criticizes the broader narrative of moral equivalency of Israel and its enemies. He avers that attempts at creating such a narrative actively ignore all evidence to the contrary, and in effect contribute to legitimizing the goal of Israel's elimination or pressuring Israel to make concessions to terrorist groups. Finally, he concludes by implicating the Palestinian authorities, stating that there can be no feasible two-state solution under current circumstances where the governing powers in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are, according to him, affiliated with terrorist groups. He maintains that this reality is unlikely to change soon, and the media has a significant role in perpetuating false narratives. In this portion of Ben Shapiro's discussion, he asserts that the media, particularly the Washington Post, is continuously casting the blame on Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister. He accuses the media of being especially skewed and favoring Hamas, even blaming Netanyahu for not disrupting Hamas's rule. Shapiro argues that when Israel has tried to act against Hamas, the world has condemned them, further complicating matters. Shapiro then moves to discuss a series of rebuttals to criticisms against Israel. He first addresses condemnations from Senator Chris Murphy, who criticized the level of civilian harm in Gaza. Shapiro points out that the media blames Israel for not using magic weapons that only hit terrorists, even when those terrorists hide among civilians. Rebuking these criticisms, Shapiro argues that Israel has to proceed against Hamas to protect its own citizens. He also challenges Murphy's assertion that the only way forward for long-term peace is through a Palestinian state. Shapiro opposes this perspective, revealing that the Palestinians have rejected peace deals multiple times in history. Therefore, he argues Israel must take on and destroy their enemies such as Hamas and Hezbollah to ensure its safety. According to Shapiro, Israel's northern border is under threat from Hezbollah, a Iran-backed group with thousands of rockets pointed at Israel. He further emphasizes that the Iranian development of a nuclear weapon could potentially enhance Hezbollah's power over Israel. Towards the end of the extract, Shapiro discusses the implications of extremism within the Democratic Party. He identifies a meeting between President Biden and prominent Muslim Americans, where Biden apologized for his previous comments on the figures coming out of Gaza. Shapiro also notes a shift in the Democrats as Joe Biden's polls decrease across the states. This, according to Shapiro, is because America seems weak under his leadership, negatively impacting its security. This perceived weakness is leading to more Democrats allegedly planning to leave their seats, implying a possible shift in leadership in the coming elections. Ben Shapiro continues his discussion by considering the changing political climate within the Democrats and Republicans. He discusses President Joe Biden's decreasing polls and views this as a significant problem for the Democrats, a sign of ineffective leadership. Conversely, Shapiro highlights Donald Trump's continuing popularity, stating that if Trump merely stands as a silent candidate, he could win due to his broad appeal in areas such as South Carolina. Trump, as per Shapiro's view, is seen as a generic Republican, a favorable quality against the backdrop of Biden's administration. Shapiro underlines his point by saying that despite Trump's unpredictable statements and high negatives with Democrats, he is treated at essence as a standard Republican. People have seen Trump before, are accustomed to his wild stuff, and according to Shapiro, perceive him as a Republican with traditionally conservative, albeit outspoken policies. He believes Trump's potential as a generic Republican candidate could easily tip the balance in the next election cycle. Continuing his podcast, Shapiro alludes to a shocking recent event. Derek Chauvin, a former police officer convicted for the killing of George Floyd, was nearly stabbed to death whilst in prison. Shapiro uses this incident to promote the benefits of his membership program, hinting that further insights and possible discussions on such significant and pertinent events would be available for members. Potential members, he adds, can use the code Shapiro to get 2 months free on all annual plans of his subscription service. These elements add an interactive and engaged dimension to his podcast content.